enthusiast and a little bit of a fermentation freak. Much like the rest of the world over lockdown, I caught the sourdough bug and became fascinated with this magical dough. So this is my sourdough starter. You might ask, what is interesting about a jar of flour and water? My answer is that despite having been around for over 5,000 years, we still don't fully understand what lives in this and how exactly it works and where does it come from. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief history of sourdough, explain how it works, and show you a really simple sourdough bread recipe that anybody can make. Sourdough bread is a slow fermented bread using a live culture known as a starter. It doesn't require any commercially grown yeast, and it has a tangy, sour flavour with a really sort of chewy centre, and then the crust is really crisp. It's probably the oldest type of leavened bread known to mankind. A sourdough starter is a culture of live yeasts that's made using two simple ingredients, just flour and water. It's fermented for a period of about 7 days to 2 weeks, and once you started your starter, it just keeps on giving. Having a sourdough starter is much like having a low maintenance pet. It can be kept alive and active by being fed flour and water regularly. There are actually lactic acid producing bacteria in the starter which prevent the growth of other harmful bacteria. So in fact, many families keep their starter alive for generations. So how do you get your own starter? You can ask a friend. People are always willing to share. There's always some left over. Or you can also buy them online from Irish suppliers. Another option is to make your own from scratch. It's very simple, it just takes some time and patience, and there are plenty of guides online that will show you how to do that. There is still a huge amount of research to be done on sourdough starters and the microorganisms that live in them and what kind of results they produce in each individual bread. Each starter is completely unique, and this comes from the environment in which it was raised, what it's been fed, and how regularly it's been fed. There's actually a starter in Mexico that requires being fed eggs, beer, and lime. There's actually a library of sourdough starters at the Paratus Centre for Bread Flavour in Belgium, and they're collecting starters from all over the world and analysing them. I recommend you also check out the Wild Sourdough Project by Rob Dunlabs, because they are collecting sourdough samples from individual people all over the world, not just bakers, and analysing them and using them in their research. So you can even send some of your starter. So a little history. Bread has been around for a very long time. The oldest known sourdough loaf was found in Switzerland and was dated to 5,000 years ago. Sourdough starter was probably discovered by accident when some dough encountered wild yeasts in the environment, and this probably happened in conjunction with beer brewing because they would have happened in the same space and been made by the same people. In Ireland, legend has it that a Stone Age woman went wandering with her lover one day and came back to discover the dough she had left had fermented. It's often said that homemade sourdough bread is much better for you than store-bought bread. Of course, since you've made it yourself, you can control exactly what's going into it, and you know that there's no extra ingredients. It also contains a higher amount of probiotics, which are really good for your gut, lots of vitamins and minerals, which come from the fermentation process, and it's a lower gluten content bread. So I'm going to show you a really simple sourdough bread recipe. It's a no-knead recipe, so there's not much kneading involved. There's just a longer rise time. With all sourdough breads, it really takes time to rise, so it's about a 2-day process from beginning to end. So I'm going to start by putting 500 grams of plain strong white flour into a bowl and adding 20 grams salt, and just mix those together nicely. Okay, and then I have 300 milliliter of regular cold tap water, and to that I'm going to add 100 gram of my sourdough starter. Then you just want to really mix it all together until you have a milky liquid. Add our liquid, which is water starter, to our dry, which is just salt and flour. So we're going to pour that right in. And just start to mix it. You can do it with your hands, but I like to start off with a spatula until it really starts to come together. So at this point, it's really starting to come together in a dough. So I'm going to get some flour on my hands. And just gently begin to start kneading it, just to make it come together. It doesn't need to be too much, just 10-15 seconds should be enough. So it doesn't matter if your dough is a little bit shaggy at this point, just a rough ball shape is okay. And then we're just going to cover it with a cloth and leave it in a warm area for 12 to 24 hours. We want to wait until the dough has doubled in size. Usually for me that's about 12 hours, but it's going to depend on the conditions of your house. So this is a dough that has been sitting for 24 hours. So it's gone double its size. You can see there's like some bubbles forming on the surface. So now all we've got to do is shape it. So in order to do that, I'm going to get a nice floury surface here so that it doesn't stick. So just sprinkle some on. And then you want to make sure that your hands and any of the tools you're using are floured as well. So I'll be using these scrapers, so just get them kind of floury. And then I'm just going to tip this out. So this is really airy, so what I want to do now is get a nice shape on it and get some surface tension on the top of the dough, but not get rid of all that air and like the gases which have built up, because they're going to give us really nice bubbles. Okay, so there it is. So it's looking floppy, so we need to shape it a little bit. So in order to do that, I'm just going to start pulling from one side, bring it in, turn it around. Pull from the top, bring it in, turn it around. And continue to do that until I have a firm shape, but I don't want to press into it too much. I still have to handle it quite gently. So now that the dough has come together more, we want to shape it and create a bit more surface tension. So in order to do that, I'm going to use these dough scrapers, but you can equally just use your hands. So I'm kind of squeezing under it and rolling it up over itself. I have lined a bowl with a towel. I'm going to generously flour it, so just make sure the dough isn't going to stick. And then place my dough in there, cover it up, and let that sit for another 2 hours. For baking, you can bake your bread on a baking tray on some parchment, but ideally you want to use a Dutch oven or casserole dish. So I haven't got a Dutch oven, but I realised that 2 casserole dishes fit on top of each other pretty well, like this, to make a mini Dutch oven. What this does is it traps the steam inside the vessel, which lets your bread rise before the crust forms. So once the crust is formed, the bread isn't going to rise anymore. The dough has been resting for 2 hours. I've preheated my oven to 250 degrees Celsius, and the casserole dish, which I'm going to use as my vessel, has been in the oven heating up also. So now I'm just going to transfer my dough to the dish. This is very straightforward. So the final step before we put it in the oven is to score our bread. You can use a really sharp knife. To be super simple, I'm just going to use a scissors. Place it at a 45-degree angle and just snip it into your dough 3 times across the middle and once either side. This bread has come out of the oven. We've let it cool down. It baked for 45 minutes in total. 15 minutes was without the lid on the casserole dish. So it's got a nice crusty edge to it. This kind of black bit here is actually called eyeliner. You can see that it's really risen and there's lots of kind of bubbly bits on the inside. So we're going to cut this open, see what it's like. You can get really creative with your sourdough bread and add other ingredients. Some nice combinations are olive and parmesan, or garlic and herbs. You can even do a sweet version with apple and cinnamon. And the best time to add those ingredients would be right after the bulk rise. So that's a long rise of about 12-24 hours. Just incorporate them gently into the dough and then begin shaping your dough. It's important to remember that your starter must be active when you use it in your bread. This means that it's recently been fed and it's bubbly and active. So to feed your starter, you can discard half the amount that you have in the jar, then refill it with the same amount. So if you have 100 gram of starter left in your jar, you're going to feed it 100 gram flour and 100 milliliter of water. Mix it together and let it sit for about 12 hours until it's really doubled in size and it's really bubbly and active. So it's a shame to waste the bit of discard that we throw away. A great way of cooking it is literally just throwing it into a frying pan and making like a little pancake. You can also use it to make pasta, which is one of my favourite things to do. It gives the pasta a real tangy flavour, which is gorgeous. And you can also use it to make muffins, cakes, plenty of other breads. If you can avoid it, don't throw it away.